This Thursday marks 1 year since the Capitol insurrection, a day that shocked almost all of us. But among the unsurprised by the level of violence we saw, the teams at FRONTLINE and ProPublica, because they've spent the last 4 years investigating the rising threat of far-right violence in America, and they saw last January 6th as the predictable culmination of years of violent rhetoric spewed throughout the Trump presidency, drawing a straight line from the sometimes deadly white supremacist rallies across the country, like that in Charlottesville, to the outright threats against Democratic lawmakers, like the 2020 kidnapping plot against Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, to the then president's January 6th call.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
FRONTLINE first released its documentary, American Insurrection, in April of last year, but tonight they're releasing an updated version with new interviews, new developments, and what members of the movement have been up to since, like gaslighting others who lived throughout the attack.
You get people who I talk to on a daily basis who will actually tell me that what I saw and experienced on January 6th really didn't happen.
The rioters that day in the building told us that Donald Trump sent us. I don't know how to make that any more clear to anybody. I just know what I experienced, I know what I went through, and they were there because Donald Trump sent them, according to them. Donald Trump sent us.
He's a Capitol Hill police officer. FRONTLINE correspondent A.C. Thompson joined me yesterday to discuss. A.C., congratulations. Good to see you again.
Thanks.
As I mentioned, the film has been updated, and I assume it was updated not purely to note the anniversary. What happened in between that you thought needed coverage and that the people needed to see?
You know, honestly, the most interesting thing about the new reporting we did was going around to the rallies that are ongoing right now, that are the so-called election integrity rallies, the Trump rallies, the MAGA rallies, and realizing that people have not let go of that issue, that there are tens of millions of Americans who believe that the 2020 election was stolen. And that is an issue that is motivating the base of the Republican Party, unlike most other issues.
You know, you mentioned near the end of the film that Charlottesville and January 6th were not bookends. Did you think after January 6th that they were bookends?
To a certain extent, I thought, you know, maybe this movement dies off at this point. Maybe people go underground. Maybe people are chastened and they don't want to go to prison. More than 700 people have been arrested. So you thought, you know, maybe that's going to put a dent in this. But what you find is that the polling numbers show that in a lot of ways, there are more people who are adherents of kind of extremist beliefs now than there ever were.
Yeah, speaking of that, I assume you're referencing, I don't know why I'm laughing, it is so grotesque, this Washington Post poll this weekend. And if people haven't seen this, if we could put this up now, roughly 40% of Republicans believe, as you see, violence against government, sometimes justified, 23% of Democrats, and overall, a stunning number, roughly a third of all Americans believe violence is a problem. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, to a certain extent, it's not surprise. There's no surprise for me. You know, before Charlottesville, we saw people talking online and they said, we're going to bring guns, we're going to bring bats, we're going to bring helmets and pepper spray. And then people seemed surprised when that happened. And I think what you've seen, and the intro kind of hit on this, is for the last 5-6 years in online communities, people are constantly discussing their desire to take violent retribution against their enemies, whether those are government officials, whether those are people with different political beliefs, whether they're people of different races or ethnicities. Like, you see that all the time. We're living in these kind of very grim times in some ways.
And by the way, it's not just you who believe it. You know, when you watch your film and you see like the 20-year-old at the time, Mike Dunn from the Boogaloo movement, or the Wolverine Watchmen who were involved in that plot against Gretchen Whitmer. I think his name was Brian James from the Proud Boys. As a viewer, they're scary. You think how dangerous they are, but you say they're total outliers. But then you interview someone like, I think her name was Mary McCord, a former assistant attorney general in 2016 and 2017. Here's what she had to say.
We know that gun purchases were up dramatically over 2020. We've seen more and more armed individuals coming out to government proceedings, whether it's the counting of the vote after the elections, whether it's public health meetings, school board meetings. The willingness to be threatening government officials and even threatening them with arms is something that really needs to be addressed, because that could just snowball.
And is Trump the common thread in terms of all this, whether it's as small as a rural school board meeting or January 6th? Is there a Trump thread through all of this, AC?
Yeah, I think there's two things to hit on. And one is that Trump is absolutely, certainly a catalyst and a thread through a lot of this. And when you interview people about the dramatic actions they've taken, over and over again, they say, I was inspired by Donald Trump. On the other hand, I would also say that some of this comes from other sides of the political spectrum and other avenues. And so there's also, threats and aggressive actions being made by people who would not identify as MAGA people or Trumpists. But the bulk of what I see is coming from, I would say, the far right and people that are inspired by Donald Trump. Speaking of where it comes from, you spend a decent amount of time talking about how there is both recruitment and training in the military. When the Pentagon announced just very recently, several weeks ago, that they were going to finally crack down on this, what sort of struck me, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, I want to know what your thoughts are, membership alone is not punishable. Action, to use their word, and action can be as slight as liking a post from one of these extremist organizations. Is that enough to quell this, or is it just window dressing? I would say the thing that's heartening about the current administration and the current leaders at the Pentagon is they seem much, much more interested in addressing this issue than any regime I can think of in many years. In the past, you would call and talk to people at the Pentagon about this, and they would just completely blow it off. And I would say in the last year, you've seen the opposite. And really, January 6th was that wake-up call. I think they're taking this much more seriously, much more aggressively than we've seen in 20 years. If your documentary was fiction, I would have been anxious every time the character playing you walked up to one of these extremists for an interview, or you walk up with your phone right in their faces to video. But it's not fiction. It's you. Are you not nervous, at least, when you're encountering some of these people who think that violence is just part of how you live? I would say the media in general have been targeted in recent years in ways that we're not comfortable with and not familiar with. I go to all these events, and all my colleagues in the media, we're all wearing body armor and helmets. I was just recently at a rally in Arizona, and a local TV news person said that it was 11:30 in the morning, and she said she'd been threatened with death 3 times already that day. And so that sort of level of harassment, which sometimes turns into violence and sometimes ends with people getting seriously hurt, is a thing that we're dealing with now that we really never dealt with before, not on this level. And you're okay? I don't mean okay with that. It's a stupid question. You can deal with that and just do your work, apparently? Yeah, it's not lovely. I'm the victim in a federal criminal case where people targeted my family and my business, ProPublica and Frontline, and called the SWAT team and sent a SWAT team to my house saying that I had murdered my whole family, and sent a SWAT team to my office and did a whole lot of other stuff. Those white supremacists are now in prison. But yeah, it's not an ideal situation. And my family wishes I had a different job to some extent. Well, I'm glad you don't, even though I respect their position. Before you go, AC, at the time of a prayer service on Capitol Hill on Thursday, Donald Trump is going to be speaking at Mar-a-Lago, and reports suggest he's going to be doubling or tripling down on this election was stolen rhetoric that's provoked much of this. What do you see as the impact of that if he says what he's predicted to say? I was at a Trump rally just recently, and this is an ongoing drumbeat. This is what he's talking about all the time. He is saying, The media are the enemy, immigrants are the enemy, refugees are the enemy, and radical Marxist Democrats are the enemy. And by the way, the election was stolen, and your country has been stolen from you, and really trying to take every tactic from the demagogues' handbook, I would say.
AC, your work is terrific, and your film is a must-see tonight. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.